And, you know, as you can see, we've sunk our teeth into a lot of the different banks. And that is partly the process of the United States bankruptcy inexorably rolling along, right? Because in that process of auditing, they start finding all this hidden wealth. That, you know, their object is to bankrupt the organization. So what you have is a queue of creditors, and we're at the head of the line. And basically, within our claims are claims for the other countries, because the other countries were being run as franchises and subsidiaries of the perpetrators that are our debtors. So there's money that has to be returned to people in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. People that need, you know, money that needs to be returned to people in Norway, Denmark, France, all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. This has been going on for a long time. And all of that money that was rat-holed and all the assets that were rat-holed have to be returned to the people that are the actual owners. And it has to be made good. At least to the extent that we can make it good, it has to be done. And, you know, I wouldn't be Donald Trump for all the money in China. It's a very difficult position. He's got a very difficult job he has to do. And, you know, you are all aware of the struggles that Jim has had over the last couple of years. Well, Donald Trump is no spring chicken either. And yet, look what a fantastic effort he has made. It really is a humbling display with just the amount of energy and drive and determination that man has to get this bankruptcy done and come out of it alive and protect the interests of this country, which is very heartwarming after all the other really terrible things that have been done to the country by our public employees. These guys are concerned about keeping their contract. So that's a big step in the right direction. That isn't to say that it's all 100%. It isn't to say that it's all hunky-dory. It's to say that Trump is making a good faith effort to clean up that bankruptcy, and he is making a lot of progress in streamlining, reducing the size of government, catching up on all of the graft and payola and nastiness that was going on. So that's all to the good. I am very concerned, and I think you should be, and Jim certainly is watching it like a hawk. We now have a situation where Ukraine doesn't want to end the war because Ukraine isn't Ukraine.
Who
You've got
are
a
they?
corporation.
I see.
Okay, so Zelensky is president of Ukraine Incorporated, the same way that Trump is president of the USA Incorporated. And there are a lot of factors that are playing in here that people need to be aware of. What Mr. Zelensky wants is a security agreement. Once he gets a security agreement, then he wants to violate that agreement and keep on warring against Russia.
Why doesn't somebody serve him a summons?
Well, it's a thought. I'm not sure that it would have any effect on him. But for example, 90% of the people who live in Donbass, which is a part of Ukraine that the Russians have already overtaken and occupied, voted to have the Russians come back. They were so fed up with the homegrown thugs that they preferred the Russians. And they voted for it. They voted to be annexed to Russia. And a lot of the people that live there are Russian. They speak Russian. They're ethnically Russian. And so it just turns out that those sections of the country that have been occupied by Russia are the ones that have all of the rare earth minerals that everybody's been chasing around after. So it makes no sense to sign on the line with Zelensky when the Russians are in control of the rare earth minerals, number one. Number two, it makes no sense to sign on the line with Zelensky when, to whatever extent and power he may or may not have, because I don't think he's legitimately the president. But anyway, he already signed an agreement, a 100-year friendship pact agreement with Britain, giving Britain control of all the rare earth minerals. So what they're trying to do is hornswoggle us into providing the security agreement that they can't provide. I mean, they don't have the manpower or the resources or the armament or anything to fight Russia. But because of Section 5 of the NATO pact, they think that they can force us into providing the security agreement so that they can control the rare earth minerals in Ukraine. At which point Donald Trump looks at that deal and goes, so everything that you saw in that meeting was really about using war as a strategic element, the war itself as a strategic element to force our hand to provide the security agreement, but get none of the spoils. So we would be over there spending our money, sending our tanks, deploying our aircraft carriers, putting in our ground troops, fighting and dying in Ukraine. And at the end of the day, Britain would get all the rare earth minerals, and Zelensky would continue on as dictator. And he is a dictator. It's already more than a year since they were supposed to have their elections. He conveniently bypassed elections and quote unquote suspended the Constitution. And he's been picking up and putting all anyone who said anything against him or his administration is being picked up and put in jail. So this is not the kind of guy we want to be supporting anyway. And you know how he had the guts to have signed this pact with Britain and pretend that he still had any minerals to bargain with and go to the White House and offer a contract for the same minerals just shows what a crook he really is. So, you know, you're dealing with a guy who isn't really somebody you can deal with. And, you know, as far as putting faith in Vladimir Putin's words, well, you have to stop a moment and realize that Vladimir Putin isn't the one whose word needs to be questioned. The ones that really started all of this were the US bureaucrats, because as Jeffrey Sachs says, back when the Russian Federation fell and Mr. Reagan was working out the details with Mr. Gorbachev way back when, remember? Some of you listening tonight are not old enough to remember this, but the verbiage was literally that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east if Gorbachev agreed to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the opening of Berlin and all the other things. So Gorbachev agreed in the name of peace. And almost immediately, NATO started encroaching. They basically made us into liars because they exercised their own little NATO creep. And year after year, they kept basically thumbing it in our faces that we'd given our word to Russia, and NATO went right ahead and continued its eastward creep no matter what. So it's not Vladimir Putin's word that has to be questioned. It's NATO's word that needs to be questioned, and it's NATO's obligation to us. Now, we've been paying all of the bulk of all of the defense of Europe since World War II. And the reason that that's been the case is that we've been occupying Europe. So it fell to us to pay for their defense. And as part of the NATO pact, they're supposed to be paying 2% of their GDP toward defense costs. All right? Well, I'm sure that all of you out there are aware of how many American troops have been stationed in Europe over the years, and how many different bases we have in Western Europe. And all that expense has come home to us, except for that request in NATO, the recommended 2%. Okay? When Trump brought it up and said, hey, you guys are supposed to be putting in at least 2% toward your own defense costs, the only 4 countries that were actually seriously putting money away toward that were minor, smaller countries. The UK was putting in 2 point something, slightly more than the 2%. The Americans were putting in 3 point something, significantly over the recommended amount. Estonia was meeting its obligations. Tiny Estonia. And Greece, the perennially troubled, economically troubled small kingdom of Greece, was making its contribution, and 10 other European countries were not. So now more of them have anteed up and are actually spending 2% of GDP. I think there's like 40% of them still aren't. But when you think about it, 2% of GDP on defense is nothing. And they aren't even willing to pony that up. If there's a war of Western Europe against Russia over Ukraine, that amount is going to go up like astronomically. You're going to be looking at 50% of GDP going to the war effort. And you're going to be looking at hundreds of thousands of Europeans being sent to the killing fields. And they will be killing fields. It will be worse than World War I. Okay, so we've already seen that movie, and we don't need to go there again, which is precisely what Mr. Trump was trying to prevent, except that Britain threw a ringer in it for its own self-interest, its own devious, lying, sneaking, disgusting, perfidious Albion's advantage. And they didn't care about us or anything else. Right, well, and again, they're right at the bottom of the dog pile. Here's Keir Starmer welcoming the dictator with welcome arms and saying, they're there, they're there. We'll send 3,000 ground troops as peacekeepers. And Russia has already said, we don't care who's there in the front lines. They've already killed more than 3,000 Koreans who came to help the Ukrainians, okay? So what Britain is doing there is making a calculated sacrifice of their own young people in order to be able to pull that Section 5 card and say, oh, we're a member of NATO, we're under attack, all the rest of you have to help us, and pull us into it, just as they did in the Second World War, the First World War, and all the other wars. These guys are warmongers that make their money from war, and so this is what they do. They are. When I say that the Brits are always at the bottom of the dog pile, you can take that to the bank. And here they are again, the same dirty Brits, sneaking in, getting a 100-year friendship pact and control of all the rare earth minerals in Ukraine from Zelensky. And I'm sure that the quid pro quo was, oh, we'll get the Americans to do the security for you. We'll get the Americans to do the security agreement. I'm sure that that's what they told him. And it's pretty obvious that he thought it was all a done deal. You know, he'd signed with the Brits, so that was as good as signing with the Americans. And he was going to come and tell Mr. Trump, you know, how hard to march and win. You see, from Zelensky's point of view, he's already penciled an agreement with the Americans. The British misrepresenting their position with us again. So, you know, doesn't that just blow a big headlight on the whole subject of the encounter between Zelensky and Trump? Trump is looking at it as, okay, you're almost done. You know, you're taking 14-year-old boys and forcing them to put on uniforms and go to the front to be murdered. And your own people are rebelling against you. Your cities are in ruins. Your infrastructure is destroyed. You're going to lose this war. Okay? And here's Britain. Oh, well, we can't let that happen. So we're going to throw our friends, the Americans, into the cesspit and the killing fields. And that'll reassure Mr. Zelensky. No. But now look at this. Say that Germany and England and 2 or 3 others, rattle the sabers and send troops to Ukraine. What can we do about it? How can we extract ourselves from the obligations of Section 5 of the NATO Pact? Well, number one, we can claim that the NATO Pact was never fully disclosed and was fraudulent to begin with. Number two, we can kick the U.S. Senate in the teeth and tell them to rubber stamp the rapid removal of our participation in NATO. Number three, we can continue as members of NATO and limit the kind of help that we send. We don't have to send soldiers. We don't have to send armaments. Maybe we can send them, 50,000 tanks full of nitrous oxide.
How about blankets?
Old World War II surplus blankets, yes. Now there are a lot of ways to play this to avoid the snare that Britain is trying to cast. And one of the good things that we can do is by alerting everyone in Congress that we know that Britain is at the bottom of this and trying to ensnare us in yet another world war catastrophe. They need to be outed. Their bad faith, their presumptions, and their impositions on other countries need to be exposed for what they are. And, Mr. Zelensky was played by the Brits, and the Brits are trying to play us. And what has to happen is that whole thing needs to unravel. Mr. Trump was trying to work something out with Zelensky to get back some of the money that Joe Biden had squandered and get something back out of Ukraine for all that American credit that was pilfered. And Mr. Zelensky made it clear that he didn't consider that a debt because Joe had presented it as a grant. He was just giving it to Ukraine. So $350 billion later, although nobody seems to be able to account for exactly all that much, it may again be another money laundering scenario because Zelensky says, yeah, you were supposed to give me all this, but actually all I got was 77 billion in armaments. I didn't actually get cash. I didn't actually get all this other stuff. So now it requires an Elon Musk to go in there with the fine tooth and figure out how much of it was siphoned off and how much of it was devoted to other kinds of supplies that were delivered and where they were delivered, and figure out the truth of the matter.
Or that were maybe funneled to the biolabs.
Pardon me?
Or that were maybe funneled to the bioweapon labs in Ukraine.
Oh, well, we already know that U.S. aid funded the bioweapons in Wuhan, in addition to the money that Mr. Fauci pulled his little backdoor deal and sent money through NIH to Wuhan. U.S. aid has been proven to have funded all of that bioweapons development. That was another big cruncher that came out today. I forget, but it was like 20 times the amount of money that the National Institutes of Health backdoored over to Wuhan, China, to continue bioweapons development even after they were supposed to be in a period of time where that was not allowed. So I think it was Fauci had sent something like, I don't know, he had sent a paltry amount from NIH backdoor to Wuhan, China, and then the actual bulk of the money came from US aid.
So shameful.
Right. And I want everybody to think about this. The shame is not only what they spent the money on, which was things like bioweapons development and drag shows in Belfast, stuff of that nature. The real pity is that the money didn't go to safe drinking water, hospitals, sanitation, roads, electrical grids, things that the developing world desperately needs, and which we would assume would be part of US aid. But instead, you had all this politicized bullshit. You had all of these things that were designed to squander money without any material result. All that quote unquote foreign aid wasn't helping the foreigners.
No, not one bit. And I mean, it's the same MO over and over and over again. I forget what was the other charity that people were sending so much, maybe Red Cross or something like that. And they built one structure.
Right.
The details are not coming to, the absolute details are not coming to mind, but the bottom line is that the money never goes to where it should go.
Right.
How is there no oversight?
Because Congress is lazy. Congress handed over its legislative job to the agencies and let the agencies develop the administrative code and the cost and collection structure and the courts and everything else. Congress is lazy. Congress is stupid.
And incompetent and criminal.
What can I say?
Yeah. I'm still waiting for somebody to call them out on the fact that they exempted everyone and their family, their friends' friends for not having to take the vaccine.
And then they forced everybody else to do it and polluted the human gene pool as a result, polluted our blood supplies, polluted everything. And the immensity of that crime, essentially giving everybody who took the shot AIDS.
And you wrote the article about VAIDS.
Right. They call it vaccine-induced autoimmune deficiency disease, otherwise known as VAIDS. And the only difference in the way it works between AIDS that you get from having sex with an infected partner and the AIDS that you get from this vaccine, quote unquote, is the way that it's transferred. One is having sex, one is getting injected directly into your bloodstream, and it has the same exact MO. You've got a thing that's injected into your bloodstream that gets into your cells, that incorporates itself into your DNA structure, so that your own DNA factory, your own cells, are producing the spike protein. And the spike protein just keeps being produced and being produced and being produced, and your immune system fights that spike protein. And eventually your immune system wears out, just like with AIDS. And at that point, you may die from any number of opportunistic diseases. You could die from cancer, you could die from diabetes, from pneumonia, from all these different things, but they're not really the cause. The cause is that your immune system has been depleted. Your immune system has been worn out fighting this internal battle with the spike protein that wouldn't exist and wouldn't be in your body if not for that quote unquote vaccine being injected. So you see, they thought they were going to be real cute about this and infect us with this crap and just stand back, and it would look like, people were dying of heart attacks and people were dying of pneumonia and people were dying of this, that, and the other thing, and that we wouldn't be able to trace it back to the cause. But we know the cause. We know how that works. We knew it before this happened. We've known this for 100 years. Okay? And who was Anthony Fauci? He was the lead investigator, the lead researcher, and his job was to stop AIDS, to find a cure for AIDS. And instead, what he did was he used his research as a springboard. His research was paid for by the public, by the way. He used his research to develop this bioweapon and profit himself off it.
Yeah, he gets paid for every vaccine that's given. Every
He
single
ought to
one.
be given a massive dose of the same vaccines.
He and Bill
I'd stand
Gates.
there with an injector, an injection needle as a hypodermic, you bet. He'd
Yeah.
look like a goddamn porcupine if I had my way. Anyway, it's a terrible thing which has been done to the people of this planet, and it was paid for by our government. And it also participated. It participated through the university system. It participated through the agency system, and it even participated through the military. Don't forget, Fort Detrick and DARPA are both involved in this. And on the British side of it, there's the Rhodes Foundation, the Pure Bright Institute, and the Wellcome Trust.
And the Pilgrim Society.
And the Pilgrim Society. All of those things they're promoting evil ideas. And those have been known evil ideas since the 1900s. So it's nothing new. They've just been sitting there in the background, clicking along, putting out all this misinformation, all these bad, elitist, prejudiced, ugly ideas. And we've been snookered by the 19th century. Something that should have been disregarded, pushed off the plate, no longer here, has continued through the deployment of the wealth that these men amassed and dedicated to these foundations and endowments and, for the purposes of spreading these evil ideas.